And thank you to everyone. I can see some people are tuning in online. Thanks everyone who's joined us for this really exciting conversation today. And thank you to everyone who sent through some questions in advance. There's still plenty of time to get your questions through for Jennifer this morning. So just pop them through in the chat and we'll get to those a little bit later in the conversation. My name is Diya. I'm the head of content at Screen Queensland. And today I'm joined by the wonderful Jennifer Carreras, the head of television development at Fierce Baby, a film and TV company founded by filmmaker and showrunner Nahnatchka Khan that focuses on amplifying new voices and perspectives in both comedy and drama. Jennifer is currently executive producer on the new NBC sitcom Young Rock, which filmed in Queensland, which stars Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and it's a comedic biographical take on his early years. So the show's recently debuted to the network's best comedy premiere rating since 2017. It's the top new scripted series premiere of the 2020-2021 season so far, and it premiered to a certified fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Jennifer will next serve as an EP on a reboot of the beloved 80s sitcom Kate Allie, which is currently in development at NBC, and on an untitled dark comedy series starring Krysten Ritter. To give you a little bit of a background on what Jennifer was doing before then, she's also been the Vice President of Comedy at ABC Television, where she oversaw the development of fan favourite series, Single Parents, Bless This Mess, and The Kids Were All Right. She also served as the Vice President of Comedy at 20th Century Fox Television Studios, where she worked on a slate of comedy shows with some incredible creators, and I'm going to name some of them now. Nahnatchka Khan, Liz Meriwether, Jerrod Carmichael, Chris Lord and Phil Miller, Jason Weiner, Lesley Wake Webster, Jake Kasdan, Mike Royce, and the Chernin brothers. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. It's such an honor, and I'm such a huge fan of what you guys do. And obviously, Queensland has grown near and dear to my heart after shooting there and being out there for as long as I was. So I'm so happy to be here to chat with you.
Thank you so much. We've got a lot of excited people joining us today, and you've had such a brilliant career in TV and especially comedy television as well. And I know there's a lot of writers and producers who are out there looking to take their first steps into that career and into series and TV. Could you talk us through what your first steps were to lead you on the journey to where you are today?
Of course, happy to. When I went to college, I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was an English major. So I just wanted to read, and I knew storytelling was really important to me. When I came out, I grew up in Chicago, which is in the middle of the country here in the US. And I moved out to LA knowing that I wanted to do something in entertainment. I thought that was feature films, to be totally honest, that had a little bit more, if I can say, sex appeal, I think at the time. I think that felt kind of like the big thing. Like if you can work on a movie, that's it. And I did a lot of internships at different film companies. I worked at Michael Douglas's film company. So the first step really is doing a lot of work for free, which is rough. I was a waitress while I was doing it. So I would intern for free all day, get people coffee, read as many scripts as I could. And then I was a waitress at night, and just waiting for the opportunity to get a paid job. And that first job came actually at a small lit agency that focused primarily on television. So when I got that job, I still had that idea of working in features in my head, but I started getting to know more and more about television and fell in love with it. And I think for me, it was about the pacing of the TV world. Movies can take such a long time, and you can be working on something for years and never really get there. Whereas television, good and bad, there's so much, it moves so quickly. So you kind of know if you're going to have success on a certain project within a year or so. And if you're not going to make it, then you move on. Yeah. So the idea, television became very appealing to me. So from that job, I went to NBC actually, and I was an assistant there for a small amount of time. And then from there, I went to be the assistant to the chairman of 20th Century Fox. And that's when I was with her for 2 years. And she was such an inspiration of mine and taught me so much because I could see the studio at such a global level. And from there, I got promoted to a junior executive and kind of moved up the ranks at 20th. but it was, yeah, I mean, I guess the first step, maybe I said too much in just that one breath, but the first step was working for free and then learning as much as I could from any job I could get or any boss I could have.
Yeah, brilliant. And do you feel like there are certain qualities that help you in a career in television, or certain tools that it's handy to have if you're trying to build that career?
Yeah, I mean, I truly think resilience is really important, and I really do. I believe that on an executive level, a producer level, a writer level, because this business is very hard, and you have to accept failure in some level at some point and not take it personally. So I think that is incredibly important. I think truly having a good attitude and treating people respectfully is incredibly important too, no matter what your level, what your job is. People move around so much in this industry. You really do want to maintain good relationships with everybody as much as you can. And I think, for me, especially in this role as a producer, having an open mind and recognizing that there are no rules to this world to some degree. I think creativity, you have to try to break boundaries, and you can't just let people kind of tell you the way it's done. You have to kind of come into things with a little bit of a philosophy of your own and be open to new ideas.
Brilliant. That's very helpful. Thank
Yeah,
you.
good.
And
Good.
so you're working at Fierce Baby now.
Mm.
What kind of drew you to that as a production company and somewhere that you wanted to work?
Yeah, I had worked with Nahnatchka at 20th in an executive capacity, and also when I was at ABC. So I knew her really well. I respected her work tremendously. I respected her reputation tremendously. She's just a really wonderful person and a very driven person and a very kind person. And to me, when I was at ABC, it was starting to feel like I think many networks do, where it's just a little bit limited in terms of the type of programming you're able to do. I was in the comedy department and I loved so much of it. I loved so many of the people there, but I was looking for something that felt a little different. Though the truth is, at the time, I wasn't even, I wasn't even really, I wasn't looking for a new job. And when Nahnatchka got her deal at Universal, she and I happened to get together and we're just talking about the kinds of things that we're excited about creatively. And we were just so in line about what we wanted to do. Again, I'm a huge fan of hers as a person and a creator. It just felt like the next right step and the next right challenge. So yeah, to me, it was very much about the person and the type of work that she wanted to do than it was about looking to, what that next job was.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know they at Fierce Baby, there's a big focus on amplifying new voices and perspectives. And so, with
Mhm.
that in mind, how raw can an idea be before you onboard it? What's the earliest that you've ever kind of come onto a project within Fierce Baby, or even more broadly, just for you?
Yeah. Well, I think what's nice about being on the producing side is that you can come in at any stage. So it can be somebody, it can be a piece of talent that just says, I want, I'm kind of interested in doing a show with nothing else beyond that. It can be a log line of this is the world I want to explore. Or people come to us with totally fully realized pitches and they'll pitch out a full pitch and we'll get on board then. Sometimes it's even a full script that will say, yes, we want to produce this and take it out and sell it with you. So we're really open to any variety of ways to get in business with you. It just depends on the project and the person.
Yeah. And are they, in terms of, say, if you're an early career writer and you may not have credits on anything else, are there things that you can kind of keep in your portfolio or kind of handy? Are there materials that you can work on to make that process a little easier to kind of convey your concept and your talent as well?
Yeah, I think if you don't have any experience, which obviously everybody starts from that place, if you don't have any experience, really having a great piece of material or a few good pieces of material is really important. Even if that's not the idea that you're coming to us to work on with, just knowing what your taste is and kind of what your writing is like is really important. So somebody could come to us with a totally random idea and they'll say, but here, read my sample so you know what type of writer I am. So I think having a script, having a short story, having a video that you made yourself, having any piece of creative content that kind of showcases what type of creator you are is really important.
Right. Yeah. And so in terms of what people come to you with and how they place their project, do you like people to have an idea of where they kind of see the project landing? Is that something they do people usually do in discussion with you, in terms of the audience that it's going to hit, and networks, or how does that process work, for then taking the project out to find the home?
Yeah, I think some people do have that. Some people, and that's totally fine. And we can try to drive things towards that particular buyer. One of the things that we really do talk about, though, is not just setting shows up at NBC or at Netflix just because they are those entities, but actually finding buyers that truly connect with the material. So if somebody came and they said, oh, I really want this to be an Amazon show, we would certainly support that. But our advice would generally be, let's take it out to the people who are interested in hearing this idea, and let's see what buyer truly connects with it. Because at the end of the day, you need champions at those homes. You need people who are invested. You need people who get it. Because if they don't, then you're kind of starting at a deficit. So we encourage to find the right creative partners versus just saying we want to be on that platform.
Yeah, and you, I guess in terms of creating content for streaming versus network TV, there are different considerations in terms of the format of the show. Does that go into how you develop a show at a point where you kind of figure out where the home is, or are there things, I guess, for people to keep in mind when they're creating for network TV, just some rules around what their show should allow for
Yeah.
network TV broadcast?
For sure. I mean, I think broadcast television is, I think there are definitely clear distinctions between broadcast and streaming. In broadcast, you obviously have things to consider, such as standards. You can't get away with, if you have a lot of sex, if you have a lot of swearing, if you have something that feels really dark, obviously that's not going to work. In broadcast, another rule of thumb, I believe, is it's the name of it, but you want content that invites every single person to the table. So broadly appealing content. So if you want to do a big broadcast show, which I think there are so many great big broadcast shows, you do need them to be broadly appealing, and you need them to be a little bit, you just need to consider those other things that make broadcast. Like you can't get away with a lot of dark stuff. And I also think, for streaming, I think that there are shows that I don't think for streaming it necessarily has to be dark or has to be sad, but I think if it's very serialized, especially in the comedy front, that might be a stronger play for streaming. And again, if creatively you want to be able to do a true 30-minute show and not allow for commercial breaks, like that is another element for streaming. So it's definitely, if somebody comes to us with ideas and they're like, well, these are the types of stories I want to tell, we definitely strategize about what kind of home in terms of streaming and broadcast is best.
Great. And then what's the process like working kind of with an executive on the other side of things for that creative coming through? Are there things for them to know and be aware of, best ways to collaborate, those sorts of things?
Yeah, you mean with like a network executive or
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and this goes back to what I was saying, just in terms, I think being respectful is always really key, even if you don't see eye to eye on something. So, because there are times, and I'm sure when I was on that side, I'm sure I've given notes that creators, that's horrible, you don't get, but I think, and it's happened on this side too, where it's, you feel like, okay, well, I hear that note, but I don't think that's really the right way for me to approach the show. So I think at any level, though, being respectful to those executives is hugely important. I think you also do have to some degree, you have to stick to your guns and the integrity of your show. So you can be respectful without saying yes to every note, without incorporating everything, because then you do run the risk of losing what the heart of the show is, right? If you take every note and it's not quite, you'll start to lose sight of the vision. So I think it's about being respectful, but also having the confidence to say, that note I hear and I understand, this particular note, I think will change the character too much. I really think we should stick to it this way. So I think if you're respectful and you're kind, then you will, people will understand when you say, okay, I want to stick to, this particular element of my project.
Yeah. So it's kind of about being able to collaborate, but knowing within yourself and knowing your story well enough that you can not necessarily defend
Yeah,
ideas, and know when it's time to kind of stick to your guns on those things.
totally. To maintain the integrity of the show, for sure. I also think another important thing is get to know those executives personally. Truly, it's like go to drinks, go to a meal, coffee, whatever, even just swinging by their office for 15 minutes if they'll have you because they're busy, because that personal connection is really meaningful in this industry. I think most people know this, but it's not black and white. It's not just business. Like when you connect with people, it really, I think it creates an understanding of what your intentions are creatively. And then you get to know each other and just like working together. It's kind of like that basic human connection, but that's really important.
Yeah. And how's I guess at the moment, because people can't physically be together as much as they normally would,
Yeah.
and we can't travel over to to
I
see
know.
you yet. How have things kind of changed in terms of building those relationships at the moment?
Yeah. I mean, it's trickier, right? Because a year ago or just over that, you could be in a room in a meeting with somebody, walk out and say, "Oh, let's grab a drink later," or that kind of thing. So that made it much easier. Now you do have to be much more proactive of putting yourself out there and just asking. I mean, in my experience, on the other side of things, if I would get a random email from somebody just like, "Hey, I saw the show," or whatever, like, I would love to grab 15 minutes of your time, I would give them that 15 minutes in a heartbeat. So I think it's about reaching out to people. And yeah, it's over Zoom, which is never ideal, but that's the way we're all learning to communicate now. So I think that it's totally acceptable. And I think it's not about necessarily being physically in a room with somebody, it's just having that confidence to reach out and try to grab a little bit of somebody's time.
And are there ways for that first interaction, especially with somebody like you, for example, is there key kind of information to fit in, if it's only a 15-minute
Yeah.
session, are there things you'd recommend for that first introduction to kind of get across from the person who's talking to you or pitching their ideas or themselves as talent?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that it's obviously depends on what you're if you want to be a writer, I think talking about the types of things that you want to write and what you're passionate about. And it's always helpful to talk about a show that that executive has worked on or whatever, like something that they've kind of connected to, I think is important. I would also say in this, I don't know if this is the best advice, but come to a meeting with a story to tell. Like come in with something that feels like it's going to stick out a little bit. Like the best meetings I've had have been somebody who's like, "Oh my gosh, I was in traffic the other day and then this thing happened." And even if it's not related to the creative thing you're pitching, I think it helps show some personality. It helps the executive remember, like it makes you stand out a little bit more. I would just say coming with a story to tell, and whatever the agenda is, if it's, "Hey, I'd love you to read the script. Hey, keep me in mind for other things, or can I send you my resume for stuff?" That's all great. Like you should have some kind of takeaway, but I do think just coming with something to offer is also really important.
Yeah, brilliant. That makes sense. Yeah. And when
Yeah.
you're looking for content, is it often that people are bringing the ideas to you, or are you kind of do you have an idea of the kind of gaps you're trying to fill in the market that you're out there looking for? How does that process work?
Yeah, I mean, we do both. So sometimes there'll be a piece of material or an idea, and we'll try to seek a writer out. A lot of times people come to us with ideas and they say, "We want you to help produce this and, guide us through this process." So it works. It works both ways. It just depends on what the project is. So I think that we're really open to any variety of it. I think the second part of your question is interesting of, are we trying to like fill any gaps, or like if there's anything that we as a company are saying, "Oh my gosh, let's try to find that." And the answer is not really. I mean, one of the things that's incredibly important for us is inclusion and diversity and telling stories that aren't being told, because that is a massive gap out there in the world. But I think that can come in so many different packages. So I would say for us, that's the biggest umbrella that we're looking under, because it's just that I think that there's still so much need for it, but it's more that than the specific, like, oh, we want to do, a serialized network crime drama or something. It's not that specific, but I do think finding ways to represent those that are underrepresented, and it's important, and that's something that we find exciting. And you can tell, like, not only are we passionate about it, but you can tell there's a huge desire for it in the marketplace, because it's just, there's not enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is there, in terms of the marketplace, when you're creating, are you looking more globally now, or is it an American audience that you seek to create content for predominantly, or yeah?
Not, I mean, in a perfect world, everything has gone so global. The more, ultimately, our goal in any way is to make things really relatable. So relatable to the human experience, which I think if you do it well, that translates beyond just the American audience. I think when you're thinking about at least me, when I'm thinking about the American audience, it's kind of like a type of humor, because humor is so subjective. And I think that can be a little bit more specific for an audience. But for us, it's how do we make content that is relatable and universal, even if it's specific. So I think that that's possible. So when we think about it, we don't necessarily think American audience. I think we think the biggest audience that we can find that will care about this show, even if it's not the biggest, but if it's a specific show, but it can target people all across the globe, like that's really great.
Yeah.
And I think for buyers, they're obviously interested in that as well. So NBC broadcast is the US, but then our studio Universal is obviously really interested in us having content that will travel.
Yeah. And are there signs? You talked a little bit about having relatable characters or stories. Are there
Mm.
other things that help a show to travel more broadly?
That's an interesting question. I think there are things, but I ultimately think it's about characters, relatable experiences. And I do think fresh storytelling is important. Like, I do think unique ways into storytelling is important, that feels different, because I think and I don't know if that applies entirely to international, but I believe it does, that people want something maybe they haven't seen before, whether it's from here or there, anywhere. So I think that having a unique way into a show that stands out is important as well.
Yeah, especially, I mean, there's so much content out there, and I think
So
audiences
much.
consuming so much are so smart. It's great to be able to kind of surprise the
Yeah,
audience with
surprise is,
different,
and
yeah.
it's so hard because there's so much content out there. It's how do you make it worthy of clicking on, right? When you have 1,000 choices in front of you at any given second. And it's interesting because it's like we're competing against every new show, but we're also competing now against every show that has ever been made
Yes.
because now people have access to everything all the time. So it's not just the new shows that are coming out in 2021. It's all the shows that have ever been created. So it's like, it really does have to stand out.
Yes. And are there shows, obviously there's shows, that are many decades old that kind of stand the test of time. Are there
Yeah.
shows that inspired you when you were growing up? And similarly, I guess just leading on from that question, are there elements that you feel make a show, stand up against the test of time and kind of have a long life, even after they've aired?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting for me. The shows that I watched a lot of TV growing up. There was the comfort food television, which would be, I don't know if you know what TGIF is, but it was. I mean, it's just multicam shows on Friday nights that I would watch with my friends or my family, and it was just the ultimate comfort food. There wasn't anything that was really breaking the mold, but that shows like that were also, you could watch them with anybody and they gave you that feeling of like, felt like your little family. But then there were shows that I remember really standing out to me, something like My So-Called Life, which I don't know if you guys have. I mean, it was an hour-long female-driven broadcast drama about a high school student, to me, in that that for whatever reason stood out as a show that I didn't know could exist. Like, that storytelling I really responded to for whatever reason. I think it was because it was a female lead, a young female lead who was really living an experience that seemed authentic to me. And I think it was, and I think it was very real. The other shows, I mean, Friends, which I don't know, like that, shows like that really stand the test of time. But I think it's because that is like incredibly relatable, right? It was small stories, characters that were really clear. There was wish fulfillment in it, which I also think is important. I think people do want, I don't think it's necessary for a hit show for any way, but I do think it is, when you have a little bit of that element of wish fulfillment and escapism, it makes people want to keep coming back and keep inviting them into their living room. And
And
yeah, and the other show that I would I will say was The Simpsons, which was something that when I was like young, I remember my parents didn't want me to watch it. Like or they thought it was kind of inappropriate, and it kind of was, I guess, for the time. But that show, like what Fox was doing at that age, The Simpsons, Married with Children, like there were shows that also just felt like they were subversive and they were kind of surprising and unexpected, but at the core of it, they were family comedies. So yeah.
brilliant. I think everyone who's tuning in will probably have a lot of shared favorites there, I think. Yeah, some good ones. So what about with Young Rock? How did that come about? Can you talk us through kind of how the project came through with Fierce Baby and the development process around that?
Of course, yeah. Well, Nahnatchka and Jeff Chang, who's her co-creator on the show, they were introduced to Dwayne through a mutual friend. And in that introduction, Dwayne mentioned he would really love to do a show that's based on his life. Like he had lived this huge life that he referred to as Forrest Gumpian life. Like there had been so many different sections of his life, and he felt like he had a lot of stories to tell, which he definitely does. So he was looking at things that were, I think the things he compared it to potentially were Atlanta or Rami, like shows that were really about kind of this singular lead and the journey that they were going on through life. So that was the initial meeting. And then what Notch and Jeff took away from that is like, there's obviously a million stories to tell, but how do you tell a million stories in one series? How do you do that and really represent the full extent of his life? And that was a big question, because they could have done there are a lot of those shows that do, it's the kid and it's the voiceover and you're flashing back to that time in his life and it's linear. And those are great shows. I mean, I love those shows, but that has been done before. And they were like, what do we do that feels a little bit different? And they came up with this concept of featuring 3 different timelines in his life, which is a huge swing. I mean, when we then started talking about it, we started talking to casting, and this idea of casting 3 Dwayne Johnsons was mind blowing. I mean, our casting executives were amazing, and I can't believe that they pulled it off with such grace. And the cast is amazing. But that was a thing that they really felt was important. How do we tell the story and show the scope of his life? And that also gave us the advantage of doing something that felt different and it felt unique because people hadn't told stories like that before. And then there was the secondary question was, how do we get Dwayne in the show? Because you obviously want to look back on his life, but it's also like to have him represented and him telling the stories. So then the concept of, running for president in 2032, that concept was born. So you could see him reflecting back on every timeline that we're featuring in this season. So that was the general way the show came to be. And then the conversation became, where do we take it and who's the buyer for it? And back to your earlier question, there was a big discussion about, is this a streaming show? Is this a broadcast show? And where we netted out on that, which I don't think you can say this about many shows, but it did feel like it could have been either. It felt like it had the potential to live on kind of either platform with just some degree of modulation, depending on where you landed. But we have a deal at Universal, so does Dwayne. So our first stop was our friends at NBC, and we just like, let's see if they fall in love with it. And we took it and we pitched it there, and it was such a wonderful experience. I mean, it was Dwayne and Notch and Jeff doing most of the pitching, and there were probably 20 other people in the room. Like, it was just a full meeting. They were pitching. It went really well, and NBC saw what we saw in the show, and they fell in love with it. So it made it kind of easy. We, again, to my point earlier, it's not necessarily about identifying like, oh, I want to be at that platform, but it's, I want to be with the people who get the show. And NBC got it. They were like, we love it. This is the direction we want to go in. We trust you. That's a big thing. It's, you want to be with people that trust you to make the show. So they were all in, and they ordered 11 episodes off of that meeting. And then we didn't end up shopping it anywhere else because they were so passionate about it. So it was a great experience.
And so did you go in pitching 11 episodes is kind of what you wanted, or did they kind of say that's what we feel would be right for this show and the audience, and then you have to shape the show to that time frame? Or
they were really, really great about being open to it. So when we went in and gave the concept of it, which is the pilot, you introduce all 3 timelines plus Dwayne, so it's 4 timelines, and then there are 3 episodes of each timeline and then a finale. So they loved the show. They said, we want to do it. And then we had a discussion about it, of what makes the most sense creatively, which again is very unique to the broadcast experience, and from at least the way I've experienced it. But they were very much, they wanted what was best creatively for the show, and they were incredibly supportive. So we all talked about it, and the 11 episodes just felt like the right way to do it. So they ran with it, which is lucky.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It sounds like, I mean, we're so excited. It's not in Australia yet, but I know it's been a massive hit in America so far, and we can't wait to hear when that lands on our shores, because it sounds like such a massive project, both with a massive icon that I think most people will have been familiar with over the last couple of decades. WWE up, and and to also then take the entire story across the past, and then leading way into 10 years into the future as well, and have those kind of little bits of potentially fantasy elements or otherwise. I mean, it sounds like a massive project.
It was a really big undertaking. Honestly, I don't know if anybody, I mean, I'm sure Notch and Jeff and Dwayne, they realized it to some extent, but the scope of this show was so big, especially because not only are you dealing with all these different timelines, but it's also a period piece at every level. So then it's every detail has to reflect accurately, because if it's not accurate, then you lose the audience. It doesn't feel authentic. So every time period, every detail, every prop had to represent the way it was. All of the wrestling, all of the wrestlers in the exact right costumes, all of the University of Miami football uniforms, all had to be accurate. So it was an undertaking in that way. And then just the pure production of the show. I mean, it was such a big show. And I will say Dwayne shared so much about his life with us, and was so generous and so trusting. And it was like, so all of that, I think, allowed for everyone to be so inspired that it didn't feel daunting. It felt, these are stories that have to be told, so let's do them. And Notch and Jeff were able to take it and shape it into something that is just, so unique and wonderful.
Yeah, it must be such an incredible creative challenge to take those real life stories and then decide, how you represent that, on TV, that isn't just a straight storytelling, or, from Dwayne's mouth to the, to the audience.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, you guys will see it soon, everybody, but I think they pulled it off really brilliantly. So we'll see. It seems like people are responding to it. So I think people do crave something that feels and looks different. And I think they did it well.
Yeah. And did you have, obviously it's been massively successful already. Do you have a moment, and you've worked on a lot of other really successful shows too, do you have a moment where you kind of have a feeling, or that this one's going to be a hit? Does it come at a certain point in development, or is it later in the process?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so. I think again, it's like there's so many failures and surprises and things that happen that kind of should or shouldn't, and that kind of take you off the rails. So I don't think there is, but what I will say about this show is that everybody walked away from production, and we're still in post actually, so there's still a lot happening, but everybody walked away from production feeling like they made the show they wanted to make. It felt like it was representing Dwayne in the way it should. Notch and Jeff felt really creatively that it was exactly what they wanted to do. So I think for us, it was that in and of itself is a success. I mean, don't get me wrong, I want it to go for 10 seasons and however long, but I do think like the idea that everybody was really happy with what the end product was, and NBC was really supportive. So I think we felt there was an element of success in that. And then, honestly, the fact that people seem to be liking it is so great. We just got to, hang on to that audience.
Yes. And
yeah.
how do you kind of make sure that there'll be more seasons worth of story, potentially 10 seasons of story? And how much do the writers go down in the writers' room in terms of fleshing out those next seasons to set up things from the first season?
Yeah. Well, what's really unique about the show is that because there are these timelines established, every season potentially, and I don't know which way this is going to go. So, because they haven't, until we actually get that second season order, the writers haven't regrouped to kind of figure out exactly what they want to do. But every season has the potential to be incredibly different. It could be, you could go back to an era that we featured in the first season, or we can go on to another chapter of Dwayne's life. So I think that gives us the feeling that it could go on for a really long time. I think the shows that are able to do, if you look at Friends or Seinfeld, to be able to tell stories in that same structure for 10 years, that's amazingly impressive and hard. I mean, this is hard in its own way too, but I think there is some freedom in knowing, we have many different areas to explore and there aren't true rules to our show. So I think that does give people creative freedom that if we were lucky enough to go for 10 years, then we'd hopefully be able to do it.
Right. And then what's next for you and Fierce Baby?
Yeah, we have a bunch of things in development right now. We have things set up at Peacock, which is, I don't know if you guys have Peacock up there? So that's like our streaming service. Yeah. We have things set up across the board. So we are really excited about a few things that will hopefully get ordered very shortly. And some of them are dark comedies. Some of them we have one that has, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm not sure how much I should reveal, but we call it the Gay Monster Bar Show. And it's so brilliant and specific and wonderful. So, and then we have some animation that's also coming up. We have a Christmas movie that is in the works. So it's really a kind of a wide net of things. And that's the way we like it. And we have a bunch, and those are things that are set up, but then we have a bunch of pitches that we're kind of gearing up to take out shortly. So we've got a lot, and the goal is to keep it going. So I think in terms of what's in production, we're going to find that out in the next couple of weeks in terms of the next thing. But we have a lot of great stuff on the table right now that we're excited about.
It all sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, we've got some questions in our chat, and just for everyone who is watching online at the moment, there's still time to submit your questions, but please do that now if you have them. We have some questions coming through from our online audience that I'd love to send through to you.
Of course.
One is from David, who says, should you seek local producers for a project such as in Australia, even if the concept is not Australian specific, or should you look global and take your concept to a US producer? So I think, David, I'm not sure if you're able to provide a little bit more info if you're watching in terms of, your project isn't Australian specific. I'll throw it to you, Jennifer. Where does it matter where your producer is? If they want to work with network TV, is it really important to have an American producer attached?
Not necessarily. I think I would say whatever producer you go with, whether they be Australian or American, just make sure A, they get the idea that you want to do, but also B, that they have the reach that you want them to have. Because I think one of the things about a successful producer is that they can pick up the phone and call anybody at any time. They kind of move barriers out of the way for you. So I don't think we've worked with when I was a network executive, we worked with producers from all over the world, and they didn't have to have an American producer attached for us to buy it. I would just make sure whoever your producer is, that they have kind of the reach and connections that you need them to.
Yeah. And is there benefits to taking a project to a network before you have a producer attached, so that they can kind of decide, pick someone that they like working with, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I think you can do it. I don't know if there's a benefit to not having a producer unless it's not the right producer. I don't think you need one to have one, but if you took something into a network, they may not even attach a producer. They may just lay it off to their studio, and the studio will kind of serve as producer/studio executive. So there's not necessarily a one size fits all. I don't think you have to have a producer unless it's the right producer who's going to help you in the right way.
Yeah. And we've got a similar question coming through from Amit, who has a pilot episode for a web series that they're working on, written by them and their friend, but they're finding it challenging to pitch it to networks and broadcasters because they're new filmmakers, and they feel like maybe there's a barrier not having a well-known production company attached to the production, and they're looking for advice around, as a new filmmaker, for pitching into production companies and broadcasters and others. Are there tips that you have for kind of the first time going in, and ways to get people to pay attention to your idea, or an entry point to your idea?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I don't know if everybody's comfortable with this, but I do think if you put something online, like if you actually upload it yourself and you actually try to create a conversation on your own, which is not nearly as satisfying as setting it up and selling it and having that. But if you have something and you can create some kind of teaser just to create a little bit of buzz on your own, I think that could be really helpful. I also think, and this is not the easiest route either, but I think it's an easier route, is finding an agent or a manager. If you find a young agent, a young manager who's looking for new talent, and try to get your content in their inbox so they can look at it. And like, those are the people that champion new talent more than anybody. I think if you're not known and trying to get out to like a network or studio executive, I think that's going to be a little bit tricky. I think you do want either a little bit of buzz, or to try to find some form of representation. Even an assistant at an agency can help you with something like that.
Yeah. And so it's great to be able to build a bit of an audience, if you can, or prove that there's an audience for new filmmakers kind of coming in with a project as well, if you have that opportunity to build it through web series as well. Yeah. We've got a question from Carolina who says, we don't have a pilot yet, but we're 100% convinced that our show will resonate with a wide audience and be really impactful. Is it still worth pitching with a one-pager and a Bible or mood book?
Sorry, I'm just, we are 100% there. Oh, so yeah. So versus pitching versus having a full script.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, people are definitely still buying content off of pitches. I think that if it's something that you want a pilot order off of, or you want a series order off of, the more material you have, the better. But if you have a fully fleshed out pitch and feel like you can do that and sell that, like, people definitely buy things that are not fully written scripts.
Yeah, great. And for you, when you kind of pitch out different ideas to find different homes for it, or have experienced those pitches coming through to you, do you feel like there's a way to tell what the response is from market? Like, do you give it a certain amount of time to hear back from a network, for example, if you're pitching your story in to them before you move on? Is it okay to pitch to multiple people at once?
Yeah, it's best to pitch to everybody at once if you can. Like, the more people you pitch to, because the best case scenario is you pitch to 7, 8, 10 buyers and they all want it, and then you create a bidding war, and then you get the biggest commitment you can get. But even if you get one buyer, one just little bite, then you can tell everybody else, oh, I have this interest. Everybody wants what other people want. So just going to one person and saying, oh, let me know what you think and I'm going to wait, is not like, you should be as proactive as possible and get your material out there.
Yeah, great. That's great advice.
Yeah.
And then Kim is wondering, I guess I'll frame this in a different way, just about Young Rock coming back to Queensland, or how was your experience? Would you like to come back?
I would love to come back. I loved it there. We were joking about opening a Fierce Baby office there because every day I loved it. The people were so wonderful, so hardworking. Creatively, we could not have asked for anything more than we got. We had the best team of people. I mean, it was amazing. We had Matchbox, that was our production entity there, and they were a dream to work with, and they really helped us, because the biggest question for us, honestly, going into it is it felt far away, and we didn't know many people there, truthfully. So for us, it felt like a little bit of the unknown. But we found out Jeff Walker, who's a co-EP on our show, and he said he will be there as a producer director, and that Notch had a great relationship with him. I've known him by reputation for years, but hadn't worked with him. So that we felt, okay, we have that piece and we really trust him. And he's so enormously talented and was a dream to work with. Then we have the Matchbox group, who they were truly holding our hands as we were trying to put pieces of the show together from LA. But then as it came together, we just met, everybody fired on all cylinders, and it was a wonderful experience. We had the resources we needed, and the team of people there was just, we couldn't have asked for more. So that was the long answer, but yes, we would love to come back. I mean, Universal has a great relationship with everybody in Queensland, and they're doing more and more there. So actually, I think the truth will be, if there's space for us, there's a lot happening there. So if there's space for us, I mean, we would come back as Fierce Baby. We would come back in a heartbeat.
Brilliant. We'd love to have you back as well. And thank you so much. We're really proud that you had a great experience here too.
Yeah, I won't stop talking about it. I'll spread the word. Don't worry.
Great. We'll work on setting up the Fierce Baby office, and
that's it.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
But look, oh my gosh, it's been so fantastic to speak to you this morning, Jennifer. And thank you to everyone who's joined us online as well. There've been some really good questions, and I feel like I've learned so much about working in the American system, about creating really great comedy TV and TV more broadly that can resonate widely, but can also stand the test of time. And I wish I could do it all again. It was fantastic. And we're so grateful to have you here with us, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. It was so lovely to speak with you. And so honestly, if anybody needs anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. What I was saying to you earlier before we jumped on, I think we are all very lucky to be in this business, and we are grateful for these jobs. And I want to help as many people as I can to kind of forge their own way too, because it's a fun business, and it can be challenging, but the reward is so great at the end of the day. So we're very lucky, and thank you. It was such a pleasure to talk to you, and yeah, it was just fun.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay. Have a lovely evening now, and have a beautiful morning, everybody in Queensland.
Yes, thank you everybody for waking up so early to be here. Bye.